Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the show. Yet another episode of Crushing Fantasy Football. I am Bryce Lockridge, your host of the show. All right, guys, today I have a list here of my top 15 overall players coming into the 2023 fantasy football season. Now, there were some players that I did not want to leave off this list, but I did leave them off the list because the players I have in front of them are just better. And so I narrowed it down to a top 15, and I'm going to be giving you my 1 through 15 PPR rankings for the upcoming fantasy football season. So I'm going to start right here with the very first player on my list, and that is Cooper Kupp. Now, Cooper Kupp, I just don't understand the disrespect among other fantasy ranking platforms. This is a guy who, if you look at his past two seasons, now obviously he was injured last year in the second half of the season, but you look at 2021, 25.9 fantasy points per game for the season. This is pretty much the most dominant fantasy wide receiver season I've ever seen. And then last year, he was leading the league in fantasy points per game with 22.4 fantasy points per game before he went down with his injury. So the last two seasons, Cooper Kupp has led the league in fantasy points per game, and he's done it by a wide margin. If you look at the 2021 season, as dominant as Justin Jefferson was, he only had 19.4 fantasy points per game to Cooper Kupp's 25.9 fantasy points per game. The difference in these two players was enormous. And this just shows how good Cooper Kupp is, because we all know that Justin Jefferson is one of the most elite weapons in all of fantasy. And Cooper Kupp was that much better than him in his last full season. And then even last year, he was beating Justin Jefferson as far as fantasy points per game before he went down with an injury. Both of his last two seasons, he had over a 31% team target share. This dude is a massive target hog. He's going to average over 11 targets per game in this Rams offense. And if you look at the Rams offense last season, they were as bad as they possibly could have been. So there's really nowhere to go but up for this offense. So if Cooper Kupp was that good in a terrible offense, if this offense improves even just a little bit, which I think it will, Cooper Kupp is going to be absolutely awesome. I don't see why he wouldn't be the number one wide receiver in fantasy yet again. Keep in mind, he's getting his field-stretching wide receiver back in Van Jefferson. Those two barely played together at all last season because Van Jefferson was hurt at the beginning of the season, and then by the time he was back, Cooper Kupp was injured and out for the season. So this makes a significant difference, guys. We need our field-stretching wide receiver in Van Jefferson to open up more targets underneath for Cooper Kupp so he can feast. This guy's going to be awesome this coming season. Next player on my list is going to be Justin Jefferson, my number 2 overall. This is a guy who every season since coming into the league has had over 1,400 receiving yards. This is absolutely amazing. And if you look at it, every single year that he's been in the league, he's gone up in fantasy points per game every single season. 2020, 17.1 fantasy points per game. 2021, 19.4 fantasy points per game. And 2022, 21.7 fantasy points per game. This dude has gone up in fantasy points per game every single season since coming into the league. This dude is an absolutely dominant fantasy weapon. Last year, he led the league in red zone targets and was 4th in overall touchdowns. So last year, he scored 9 touchdowns, right? I think that this offense could be even slightly better this year than they were last year because we've got a healthy Alexander Mattison in the backfield who is a very explosive back. I think that he's going to be a lot more reliable than Dalvin Cook because he can actually stay on the field. So this offense is two-dimensional. I love the overall efficiency of this offense this year. If Justin Jefferson eclipsed double-digit touchdowns this year, I wouldn't be surprised whatsoever. I absolutely love this guy. I can't put him ahead of Cooper Kupp, but he is my number 2 player overall. Next player on my list is going to be Jamaar Chase. So if you haven't noticed, I've started with 3 wide receivers to start my overall rankings. And that's because the wide receiver position is just significantly more polarizing than it's ever been because they're receiving so many targets. These wide receivers are coming out and averaging like 11 targets per game over the course of an entire season. It's pretty crazy. And with Jamaar Chase, what we have here is a player who is tremendously athletic. In fact, of all the wide receivers that I have in these first 3 slots, Jamaar Chase is the best overall athlete. Runs a 4.39 40 time. He's tremendously elusive and dangerous in the open field. He went from having a 23.7% team target share to a 29.3% team target share last season. And then obviously he went down with the injury. But despite missing 5 games, this guy was 3rd in the league in red zone targets with 26 red zone targets, and he had 9 total touchdowns. So this guy is my favorite for all wide receiver positions as far as leading the league in touchdowns. I think among all wide receivers, this guy is going to lead the league in touchdowns. I'm very excited for what Jamaar Chase can do. And he also led the league last year in his expected fantasy points per game. He had 19.8 expected fantasy points per game. So this offense is providing him with the opportunity to be the number 1 wide receiver in fantasy. I don't think he's going to finish ahead of Cooper Kupp or Justin Jefferson, but he could certainly give them a run for their money. And it is not outside of the range of possibilities that Jamaar Chase is the number 1 wide receiver in all of fantasy. Next player on my list is going to be my first running back I have here, Christian McCaffrey. Now, The biggest win for Christian McCaffrey last season was that he played all 17 games, right? I mean, that's the number one thing that we wanted to see with Christian McCaffrey last season is we wanted to see him stay on the field after, missing significant amounts of time in the 2020 and 2021 season. So with that being the case, he played all 17 games. He led the league in receiving yards with 741. A 75% route participation for the running back position, which was first in the NFL. No surprise there. 1.92 yards per route run. He was incredibly efficient when he did run his routes. And 5.7 yards per touch, which was top 8 in the NFL. So we're looking at a Christian McCaffrey who is arguably a probably top 3 most talented running back in the entire NFL. In fact, when you put in both phases of the game, he might be the best. When you combine rushing ability plus pass catching ability, he might be the most talented running back in the entire league. And he's now playing in by far a better offense than he's ever played in. He comes into the San Francisco offense last season, without really knowing anything about the offense, having to learn the playbook at the very last second. And, he comes in and is just absolutely dominant. Now, imagine how dangerous this guy can be with an entire offseason to work with the team. This guy is going to absolutely explode this year. And even if he has less touches than he did in his dominant fantasy days in Carolina, his touches are going to be more high-value touches because he's in a way better offense and has way higher touchdown upside. So I love Christian McCaffrey. He should be the first running back off the board this following season. Really, it's not even a debate to me. He should certainly be the number 1 running back off the board. He has by far and away the highest ceiling of any running back this season. Next player on my list is going to be Bijan. So, if you look at Bijan Robinson in his college seasons, 2020, 2021, 2022, his rushing attempts went up every single season significantly. He went from 86 rushing attempts in 2020 to 195 rushing attempts in 2021 and 258 rushing attempts in 2022. So he's becoming more and more of a workhorse as his college career progressed. He comes over to a Falcons team who was second in the league last year in rushing attempts per game. They averaged 32.9 rushing attempts per game. And I would be surprised if they didn't lead the league in rushing attempts per game this season. This is going to be the most run-heavy team in the NFL. They invested top 10 draft capital in a running back, which does not happen in today's NFL. So I love Bijan. I love the outlook this season. And if you look at the overall efficiency of their offensive line, I think that they have a ceiling to be a top 5 overall offensive line in the NFL. This is going to create big holes for Bijan Robinson to run through. We know that his big play ability and ability to run between the tackles for his, every down gains are second to none. I mean, this dude is going to be incredibly efficient, running behind a very good offensive line that could far exceed expectations and be a top 5 offensive line in the NFL on a team that's probably going to run more overall rushing attempts than every team in the entire league. And we've got some pass catching weapons. Kyle Pitts and Drake London are going to keep the defenses honest, at least to a degree, because those guys are absolute weapons. And so I think this offense has some sneaky upside. So the touchdown upside is there for Bijan Robinson as well. I love him this season. Next player on my list is going to be Tyreek Hill. Now, Tyreek Hill, 1,710 receiving yards last season, second in the NFL. 31.6% team target share, which was second in the NFL. 39.8% air yard share, fourth in the NFL. This dude gets all the opportunities in the world. He led the league in deep targets, and he was first in the league in yards per route run by a wide margin. There was no other wide receiver even remotely close to Tyreek Hill in their yards per route run efficiency. He had 3.38 yards per route run last season. I almost want to have this guy higher in my wide receiver rankings because he's just so good. But, the top 3 wide receivers in fantasy this year are just so good in their own right that I just really couldn't put Tyreek Hill ahead of him. But having a player this good outside of my 1 or 2 players like overall in fantasy, I really hate doing it, but he is my number 6 this season. So I think Tyreek Hill is going to explode. And if he's your number 1 wide receiver on your team, you're set for a good season. Next player on my list is going to be Tony Pollard. Now, I have Tony Pollard way higher in my rankings than anyone is going to have in their running back rankings. And I called the breakout last season. I told everyone, fade Ezekiel Elliott, draft Tony Pollard. Everyone laughed at me and said I was crazy, as they usually do when you predict breakout players. But look, this is a guy who is a true workhorse back. 6 foot, 210 pounds. He's not as small as people say he is. Everyone likes to come up with this argument saying that he's too small to be a true 3-down back. He's not a true 3-down back. People say things like this, and they really don't have any backing as to why. All they did is copy what somebody else said. Somebody in the fantasy industry decided to come out one day and tell people that Tony Pollard is not a true 3-down back, and then everybody wants to sound smart, and so they start copying this, and they start saying, hey, well, Tony Pollard's not a true 3-down back. He's not a true workhorse. Who said? Who gave him the title of not a true workhorse? He has proved nothing but being a true workhorse, mega beast running back when given his opportunities in this league. This dude last year, 17 breakaway runs, which was top 30 in the NFL, which means how many times he runs the ball for 15 yards or more. So despite not starting the season as the starting running back for the team and still splitting carries with Zeke as the season went along, he was third in the league in breakaway runs with 17 breakaway runs, which is runs of 15 yards or more. He had an 8.8% breakaway run rate, which means that 8.8% of the time when he carried the ball, he ran the ball for 15 yards or more. You look at this dude's efficiency over the past 2 seasons. The 2021 season, 5.5 yards per carry. Last season, 5.2 yards per carry. This is one of the best, most talented running backs in the NFL. He's top 5, undisputed top 5 most talented running back in the NFL. He is in that conversation. And so we're looking at Tony Pollard. We're looking at one of the best running backs in the league and an offense that runs at a ridiculous pace of play. This Dallas Cowboys offense runs more plays than almost any team in the league every single season. You look at the past 5 seasons in fantasy. This team is top 5 in the league almost every single year as far as their pace of play. So they're giving all their fantasy weapons more opportunities than anybody else. So not only is Tony Pollard hyper efficient, but he's going to get a ton of touches and a very high scoring offense that could lead the league in overall points scored. I love the upside for Tony Pollard this season. People are going to come at you with the, hey, he's not a true workhorse thing. This is absolutely untrue. Tony Pollard is a true workhorse, and he is going to put up a monster fantasy season. I have him as my number 3 overall running back coming into the year. And a few more stats on Tony Pollard, 9.5 yards per reception last year, which was second in the NFL. And he was 4th in his yards per route run with 1.82 yards per route run. So he's incredibly efficient in the passing game as well. This dude has everything going for him, and he should be drafted in the first round. A lot of times he's going to be slipping around 2, so you can take advantage of the ADP. But if you're drafting at the back end of round 1, don't be afraid to take Tony Pollard as your first player overall. Next player on my list is going to be Stephon Diggs. Now, I want to first point out that in the past 3 seasons, Stephon Diggs has had over 1,200 receiving yards, at least in the past 3 seasons. And, last year, 23 red zone targets, which was 4th in the NFL, 11 touchdowns, which was 2nd in the NFL, 110 receptions, 3rd, 2.87 yards per route run, which was 3rd in the NFL. This dude was absolutely awesome. And it was looking for a while like he had the chance to finish as the wide receiver 1. But as the season progressed, the last 3 or 4 games of the year, he put up that complete dud. There was obviously that game that he missed when Damar Hamlin went down with the injury, so they didn't play that game. So that provided him sort of a disadvantage as far as his overall fantasy points. And then, there was some bad weather in Buffalo towards the end of the season. And, he played in a lot of, games with poor weather conditions. So that kind of messed him up. But I think people forget that this dude was pretty much on track to be the wide receiver 1 in fantasy if he didn't have that bad final month of the season. So I love Stephon Diggs going into this year. There's obviously some drama going on in Buffalo, and that's why I don't have him higher in my overall rankings. And, is Stephon Diggs happy with how things are going in Buffalo? I'm not so sure. There seems to be a lot of drama in the clubhouse right now. So I want you guys to exercise caution taking him in underdog drafts right now. And there are certain receivers that you just need to be taking in front of him, like the ones I have listed ahead. But you still can't really pass up on the ceiling. He's still a very good first-round pick. I love Stephon Diggs this season. Next player on my list is going to be Garret Wilson. Now, Garret Wilson, a guy who runs a 4.38 40, he was a first-round draft pick for a reason. This guy's tremendously talented. He saw 147 targets last season, so he's an absolute target hog. And he somehow only had 83 receptions, which was 16th in the NFL. So considering how many targets he saw, he should have had more receptions. But the fact of the matter is he was playing with absolutely terrible quarterbacks. Now you insert one of the best quarterbacks of all time in Aaron Rodgers to sling him the rock. I love Garret Wilson's upside this season. He should be a first-round draft pick. This dude's an absolute monster. He's got all the talent in the world. Playing on an offense that has a ceiling to be a top 5 offense in the NFL. Draft Garret Wilson at the back end of the first round with confidence. Next player on my list is going to be Rhamondre Stevenson. Now, Rhamondre Stevenson, 5'11", 225, built like a workhorse. Last year, averaged 5 yards per carry, was very efficient. He had a 40.5% juke rate, which was top 3 in the NFL, which is basically the percentage amount of times that you're making defenders miss on your run. So he's very elusive. He can run you over with his size and power. 3.43 yards created per touch last season, which was top 6 in the NFL. So, he's averaging 3.43 extra yards after bouncing off that first tackle. This was a very impressive statistic. And he had 15 breakaway runs, which was top 6 in the NFL last season, meaning that, 15 times throughout the course of the season, he ran the ball for 15 yards or more. This dude's incredibly efficient. He's incredibly talented. The touchdown upside might not be as good as the running backs I have ahead of him. That's why I don't have him higher. But from, just a basis of how many targets he's going to see out of the backfield and how ridiculously talented and efficient he is in the rushing game, this dude is the ultimate dual threat, and he should be one of the first running backs off the board. Next player on my list is going to be Amon-Ra St. Brown. Now, this is a guy last year, 106 receptions, which was 5th in the NFL, 2.57 yards per route run, top 4 in the NFL on his yards per route run. He was 9th in the league in his yards per route run. 267 total fantasy points, which was 7th in the NFL. So top 7 at the position for Amon-Ra St. Brown. He's now going into a season where I think the Lions are expected to be a very good football team. I mean, this is actually, I think, going to be one of the better football teams in the NFL, especially from an offensive standpoint. This team is going to be putting a lot of points on the board. I love Amon-Ra St. Brown this coming season. He has the outside shot to finish as a top 3 overall wide receiver. I think that's the absolute ceiling. It's top 3 or 4, but he could certainly end up top 3 or 4 as far as his range of outcomes. More likely to be like the wide receiver 5 or 6, but the dude is absolutely awesome. If he was a top 5 wide receiver this season, I wouldn't be surprised whatsoever. Next player on my list is going to be CeeDee Lamb. Now, I have 2 Cowboys in my overall top 12, and if you guys can't tell, I love the Cowboys offense this season. It's going to provide awesome opportunities for CeeDee Lamb. Now, CeeDee Lamb finally had that breakout season last year that we were like waiting for him to have, right? We knew that it was coming, but we wanted to see it actually happen. Last season, it finally happened. 17.7 fantasy points per game, which was top 7 in the NFL. 301.6 total fantasy points. So he finished 5th at the wide receiver position, and he was very efficient. 1,300 plus receiving yards, 2.62 yards per route run. This dude was absolutely awesome from an efficiency standpoint last year. So I love CeeDee Lamb coming into this season. Like I said, this Dallas Cowboys offense, they score a lot of points. They have the shot to finish first in the league as far as overall points scored from an NFL overall points scored perspective. So I love CeeDee Lamb this coming season. Next player on my list is going to be Chris Olave. Now, if you've been doing underdog drafts, you've been noticing that this dude's ADP has been creeping higher and higher. And I'm disappointed because I thought I was going to be getting him at a steal like throughout the entire offseason and even as we got closer and closer to the season. But his underdog ADP is starting to creep up. And, we're looking at a guy, a talented first-round draft pick that can line up out of the slot. He can line up outside. He's incredibly versatile. He's incredibly fast, 4.39 40 time. You look at his target share last season, 26.7% target share as a rookie, which was top 15 in the NFL, and he was 3rd in air yard share with a 40.3% air yard share. This dude literally has a chance to have a higher air yard share than that this season because, he is going to be the entire offense, right? The Alvin Kamara situation is a mess. The run game is very, patchwork right now, so we're just not really sure how the backfield is going to be operating. This team is going to run through the pass. He now has a quarterback upgrade in Derek Carr, and so, a lot of people like to give Derek Carr a bad rap, but he's definitely a quarterback upgrade from what Chris Olave had last season, undoubtedly. So, this is going to be very good for Chris Olave. If he finishes a top 12 overall player, I would not be surprised. Next player on my list is going to be Devante Adams. Now, I obviously hate having Devante Adams this low because, this is one of the best receivers in the NFL from a pure talent standpoint. And he's put up back-to-back seasons of having over 1,500 receiving yards. Last year, he led the league in target share with a 32.6% team target share. Now, the only reason why I have Devante Adams as low as I do is because the Raiders' offensive situation is a mess. I mean, it looks like Jimmy G is going to be the quarterback. The dude failed his physical. The dude is a walking injury. And even when he's healthy and on the field, he is not a true NFL quarterback. He really doesn't have any business being in the NFL. The dude is not good. He's had his San Francisco team carry him, and so he's been winning games, and so people think that he's a good quarterback. But, guys, this is a team game. That San Francisco offense carried Jimmy G. If you watch this dude play, he's trash. He's not a good quarterback. So, who's going to be the quarterback in Las Vegas? I don't know. Is it going to be Jimmy G? Is it going to be someone worse than Jimmy G? I don't know. The offense is an absolute mess because of the quarterback situation. So because of this, I don't trust the overall efficiency of the offense. And so for that reason, I can't trust Devante Adams like I normally do. Because of the messy offensive situation for Devante Adams, I have him way lower than I would like to have him. So, it's still Devante Adams. He's got to be in my top 15 because of how great he is. But due to the offensive situation being a total mess, I have him at my number 14 overall. Next and final player on my list is going to be Travis Kelce. Now, this is a guy who he's defying all the laws of, Father Time. This dude is just coming out, and despite being like one of the oldest players in the entire league, especially as far as the skill position players, this dude last season, 1,300 plus receiving yards, first in the NFL, 110 receptions, first in the NFL, 12 touchdowns, first in the NFL, 18.6 fantasy points per game, first in the NFL, 316 total fantasy points, first in the NFL. He led every tight end by a wide margin in every vital tight end statistic. So I love this guy's outlook this season. He doesn't seem to be bothered by the fact that he's getting older at all. Now, at some point, this dude's going to fall off a cliff. It's going to come out of nowhere. It happens to every player at some point. But, seeing what he did last year and being in such a good offense and having Pat Mahomes slinging the rock, I have to draft him as my first tight end overall. In fact, it's not even a debate. So I don't like taking him in the first round because I don't draft tight ends in the first round no matter how good they are. but I'm willing to take him in the second round if he slips. This is not going to happen 99% of the time. So me personally, I'm going to be fading Travis Kelce this year because I don't want to draft him in the first round. But if he somehow slips to the second, I'll definitely take him. And as far as overall rankings, he should be the easy first tight end off the board. All right, guys, those are my top 15 overall rankings. If you want my entire top 150 overall rankings, I left a link to my Patreon in the comment section below. Go over there, click on it, go join my Patreon. You can get my top 150 overall rankings. You can also get in a league with me and others from the Crushing Fantasy Football community. So it's only $5 to go join the Patreon. So go join. You're going to get access to my top 150 overall rankings. You're going to get access to my weekly fantasy news article, and you're going to get in the Patreon league where one person or maybe two people is going to win a lot of money this year, and it's a 10-man league. So the chances of winning are, totally possible. Not that unlikely that you could win that league and win a lot of money. So, all right, guys, I appreciate you tuning into the video. I will catch you later.